Welcome to another episode of the Deeper Than Know podcast. I'm super excited to have Erica Rankin on the show. Erica, welcome.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
Erica, I've been following you for a few years. I remember I was actually in Texas. You just told me you moved to Texas when we had a phone call. I think we connected on Facebook Messenger, but that was 2 or 3 years ago. So I've been following your journey and been absolutely loving it. But if you don't mind, give us a few minute background of who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, time flies, eh? I feel like so much has happened between now and then, but I am a former food and beverage founder. So I had a company called Brodo. So, I was in the food space too. I had a cookie dough company based out of Canada. And after 4.5 years, I shut it down earlier in 2024. And then now I am a personal branding expert and I have a podcast called You're Not a Bad Person, all around personal development.
Been doing the podcast for.
How long have I been doing the podcast for?
Yeah.
I think I just hit episode 8, so almost 2 months.
Awesome. I listened to the first two episodes and I don't want to give away any teasers. You did it, you did the first two episodes right. The first one was your background, getting into sex work that led you up to entrepreneurship. And the second one was about building the company and also deciding to shut down doors, which are two of the most interesting topics that nobody talks about. So you launched it right, and I appreciate that. Where'd you come up with the name? You're not a bad person.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things that I think it came to me in the shower. Like, when you're just like trying to like make something work and come up with a name and then it just kind of hits you, and that was the one that stuck. And I don't know, I feel like we're so hard on ourselves and everyone does things that they're not proud of, and we're human at the end of the day, and I just want to create a safe space where people can just be themselves. And I have a very controversial, messy past, and I like talking about controversial shit. So that's what the podcast is about.
I love it. And you're not a bad person. I could see it right behind your head as well,
Yeah.
beautifully framed. Is there a personal journey behind that story and that name as well, or is it more you observing friends and family and having the message be to them? Love to dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, you kind of touched on it, but I was in the sex work industry for 7 years and I didn't tell anyone. It was a secret that I carried, out of shame, out of feeling like I was a bad person. And I later then realized like that's not true. Like the things that we do not define us, and your past doesn't discredit your success. It doesn't, disqualify you from future opportunities, and it doesn't define you. And so I kind of created the podcast to not only help others, but myself too.
Was that, I guess, the catalyst of like, okay, I did this for 7 years. I didn't want to share it because I did have the shame and the guilt. How did you get past the shame and the guilt to one, dismiss it? That's kind of the first step. And the second step is now I'm ready to share it.
So there's a quote that I love, and it goes something along the lines of, "You're most qualified to help the person you used to be." And I have shared my journey so openly the past 4 years of building my business. Like I built in public, I posted online the highs, the lows, of building a food business. And there were so many aspects that I was okay sharing about my life, but this one part of me, I just felt like I hid from the world and I was ready to show it. And I know someone would, benefit out of me sharing my story and talking about my story openly. And I have realized that, wow, okay, this is actually making a bigger impact than I thought. And I think, you know, um, many of us have stories to share, and I think we're doing others a disservice and ourselves a disservice if we're not talking about it openly, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And I imagine I've hated raising money and having board members and crap because then they all give you their dumb opinions,
yeah.
their opinions that I think are dumb, right? And a lot of it is like you should or shouldn't be outwardly expressing yourself on social media. And I'm just like, no, no, no. I get to choose what happens, And but I do see the argument like, hey, if you're raising money, if you're posting about a hair transplant that you had in Turkey, is that going to bring more or less investors to you? And like it was a whole big thing. I had to go reach out to all of our current investors and
Really?
say, hey, what would you change on the social media? Because this one board member is like having a fit. I honestly think though, and I threw out that random example, or like a weight loss surgery or
Mhm.
peptides or whatever,
Mhm.
I have found that those are the posts that get more engagement and those are the posts that allow you to connect with your audience better because
Yeah.
they're things that aren't being shared by other people. So my question, when you started sharing that story about your past, was it polarizing to some of the audience, or do you feel like it brought a lot more people in, at least in comparison to maybe the people that pushed away?
Oh my gosh, I tell everyone to just like open up and share things, and we learn from each other, and people admire success, and it's great to brag, like have humble brags and share all your wins, but it's hard to relate to that. And when I started really sharing a lot of the uncomfortable things that a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about, that's when I started to really pull in a lot of people. It resonated with a lot of people because they saw themselves in the content that I was putting out. Because it's hard, you go on social media and you're scrolling, especially LinkedIn, for example. It's like toxic positivity, and I raised X amount of money, I got distributed in this amount of doors, but then behind closed doors, there's all these other things going on that they're not comfortable talking about. Like their business is falling apart and nobody knows. It doesn't look that way at all. And then here you are, like riding the struggle bus and feeling like you're alone and you're doing everything wrong. And maybe entrepreneurship isn't for you, but people just aren't honest, right? So I think there's so much power in just sharing openly and being honest.
Yeah, and I'm definitely on the same page with you, but I still feel like I'm struggling with the balance of that.
Mm.
On like, you can listen to me on a million podcasts and like, congrats on the success. And usually my response is like, you should take a look under the hood. Everything's on fire and everything's held together by duct tape, but I'm glad it looks, so it's like I try to share it, but I'm also, if you're too open about it and you're struggling, which all startups struggle,
Mhm.
is that going to potentially hurt franchisees, your business partners, things like that? Um, I don't know. Love to hear your initial reaction to that.
I guess I think you have to come at it from like a place of like you don't just go on the internet and be like, "Oh my God, everything is on fire and everything's going wrong." It's like, "Here's what went wrong and like here's how I
Yeah.
fixed it." Like I think you have to come at it from like an educational approach and not just like post a meltdown on the internet, but I have done that in the past, and looking back, I'm like, I maybe should have approached that differently. But like I think it's good. And I've had people come to me and they want help building their personal brand, but like they have their business, they have a bunch of shareholders, they have to maintain a certain reputation. And it's like, okay, if I share too much, like, is it going to drive people away, or are people going to think differently about me? But I think there's a tasteful way to do it where you can be human and put out stuff that's authentic and real to you, and not just like the shiny bullshit that
Yeah.
everyone sees, the copy and paste stuff, right? That doesn't really resonate.
Yeah, it's very easy to go interview people that had successes or failures 5, 10 years ago, and they'll talk
Mm.
about them openly. But it's like, but how do we talk about them openly during, without really jeopardizing the business or the potential investors, whatever? And I think you hit it right on the head. Rather than waiting until you sell your business to talk about it, just, you have one problem, solve it within a few weeks or a month or a year, whatever, and then post about it like, this was the issue, this is how it was solved. So you are solving issue with resolution, but you're doing it more in real time rather than, this is what we did 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And especially for other entrepreneurs in the journey, and they're like, man, why isn't my business blowing up? Why isn't everything perfect in my business? And the answer is because you think it should be, but that's not correct. Because go find me a startup that is perfect, right? But because of that perception on social media, our expectations are like, oh, there's going to be some struggles, but not that much. And it's like, no, no, no. There's going to be struggles every day, all
Yeah.
day, and that's okay. You need to learn how to love the struggles rather than how do I solve all my struggles so I no longer have any struggles, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
At least
Yeah.
that's the mindset that I am on. Don't focus so much on solving all of your problems, hoping that that's going to bring you that joy or fulfillment, but instead focus on what's causing you to perceive all of these issues as problems, because a problem is a perception. Fix that, and then you're not always like, if I get, once I guess I'm going to ask you a few things. What were those like landmarks in your business that you're like, once I hit this, things are going to be differently. Once I get into Target, once I get
Oh
into
God. Yeah.
10 stores, once I get into 100 stores, once I do 100,000 of revenue, whatever those numbers were, what were those benchmarks that you set for yourself that you thought you would feel or achieve a certain thing when you hit it, but turns out, or it probably turned out that it wasn't as fulfilling, and then you just immediately set that next goal?
Yeah. Isn't that just like entrepreneurs in general? Is like we're always moving the finish line.
Yeah.
Like I
I mean,
feel
I
like
think it's human nature. I think
yeah.
it's not entrepreneurs. I think it's the
Yeah.
way the brain's wired and how dopamine works in your brain, and it doesn't last a long time in your brain. Your brain releases dopamine and then almost immediately reabsorbs it to reset it back to zero. So now you can get dopamine from something else again.
Yeah, it's so funny because I was talking like this is what yesterday I recorded my podcast and I talked about how I like my self-love journey, but my fulfillment journey and how I was relying on external things to get it. And it was always like when I achieve this or when I get this or when I lose X amount of weight or when I get, I've had many surgeries too. Like when I do this and this and this, like there are all these things that I was relying on to bring me, I don't know, joy, I guess. And I thought, okay, once I get into 100 stores, I've made it. I'm good. And then I get into 100 stores and I'm like, oh my God, there's so much I need to do still. Like that's nothing. That's micro. Like now I need 1,000. Now I need, to raise money. And it was just always, there was always something coming. And touching on what you said earlier, like the perception of like problems, like that's the reality of our lives is we're problem solvers and we just have to accept that and just expect that there's going to be problems every day. And you just have to handle them as they come and just not wallow in it and cry that the sky is falling every time you get a problem because you'll never stop crying, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of a book called The Untethered Soul?
Oh my gosh. Okay. 4 people this week, I'm not even kidding, have told me to read that. And I have it in my notes and I'm going to read it.
Okay, read
Yeah.
it. And the same thing. People have been reading it, telling me to read that for 2 years. I started it yesterday. I'm like, oh, this would have helped me so much in the last 2 years. Um, I'm going to challenge that thought a little bit because I've always had the same thought process, but now this book, as of yesterday, is changing my mind. On problems. On a problem is a perception. I mean, you can look at two different scenarios, and one person views it as a problem, one person doesn't, and one person might even view it as an opportunity. So, like a problem is a by by definition, it has to come from a perception. So can you change your perception to start viewing those as problems? And then you don't have to have all these problems to always be solving. Anyways, just let me know after you read the book,
Yeah.
and we could talk about it a little bit more. But it is definitely a big mindset shift on how we've been trained and taught how our minds work versus if you analyze it a little bit closer, how it actually works. So
Yeah.
very interesting though.
Totally. Yeah. Or touching on that, if you change your definition of what a problem is, like I look at it as like, okay, a problem is an opportunity to grow. Like that's kind of how I look at it now. I'm like, okay, at least I'm going to learn something new from this. Yeah, it sucks, but I'm going to learn.
Yeah,
So,
and the changing your view on problems is definitely the way to go.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think when you that mindset of like, what am I learning? If you always focus on that, at least my experience has been, if I'm focused on revenue, I could not hit my revenue numbers. Or if I'm focused on
Mhm.
profit, I cannot hit my profit numbers. But if I'm focused on learning to be the best leader or person or father, mother, whatever, now that's a lot more subjective and I get to decide if I'm fulfilling that. And it puts you a lot more in control emotionally
Mhm.
of your state. At least that's what I think. So
Yeah. No, I agree.
um shifting back to the business. Would you do it again? How you did it? Or if you did it again, would it be different? Would you want to find investors? Would you go slower? Would you go quicker? What are the practical things that you learned that you would now apply to either your podcast business or anything else that you might do in the future?
Oh my gosh. I don't think I'll ever launch a food business again in my life. Like, be completely honest. If I were to do it over again, so I did it very scrappily. I built it out of passion. I didn't really research the industry or anything.
Yeah.
So I think if I were to do it again, I would do proper like market research. I would have a co-founder and then I would have a substantial amount of funding to like really kick things off and do things properly because as you know, with like CPG and food especially, like cash flow is a huge thing and you need to have sufficient funding and there are so many moving parts and you can't do it all on your own. So I tried to do it all on my own and yeah, it got me so far and I did raise some money, but I didn't raise enough money. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would go back into food.
I'm with you. I just was talking to somebody about this 2 days ago, and they're like, "Okay, so when you do it again, you got." I'm like, "I'm not doing it again."
I'm not doing it again. Yeah.
Nope, no. It was too much, too fast, too stressful, and yeah, it was fun, but like again, I think I just got way too caught up in the excitement and the fame and the news articles and the franchisee. But it's like, but was it really helping me reach my goals, which were to have a happier, less stressful life with more
Mhm.
joy and more time with my family. And it's like, no, it
Mhm.
didn't, you know? In some aspects it didn't, but in most aspects it didn't. Anyways, shifting to the personal branding, I want to dive into that. I think you're amazing at personal branding. I'd love to hear, why is personal branding important?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And yeah, it's never too late to start a personal brand. And if I didn't have a personal brand, I probably wouldn't be sitting here with this beautiful studio around me. And in building Brodo and growing Brodo and then shutting down Brodo, the one thing that remained consistent was me and my brand. And I think every person, it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur or you're not an entrepreneur, you could be in corporate, like you never know. Like it's the biggest asset to have is your personal brand. Like it can bring you so many opportunities, not only now, but down the road as well. Like you never know where you're going to end up and what you're going to do. And so now I'm currently in the process of building out a course and a community that teaches people how to be their authentic selves and tell their story online and then generate more income, more opportunities, and create more impact. And I think it's great. Like you can tell your story, you can be authentically you, and then you can make more money while doing it.
That. And I started creating my personal brand probably 2.5 years ago,
Mhm.
right before we opened up our first franchise. And I think that was one of the best business decisions. I resisted it so much because I'm like, I don't, if it's a personal brand, then that means I have to always be doing it. And I want to outsource it. You know, turns out though you can outsource most of it. You could get uh, people to manage and to record and to come up with captions and chat GTP to come up with very similar responses if you train it correctly. And you really can automate most of that. But that's where most of our franchise sales have come from, is not paid ads, but just free social media around a personal brand. What do you feel like most people get wrong with their personal brand when they're starting? Like, okay, I want to build a personal brand. Um, what are the common errors?
They don't provide enough value. Like I think people just go in and especially with entrepreneurs and new businesses, I think they just start like selling and they're like my product or service is the best and like this is who I am, this is what I've done, and it's more so just kind of like the highlights of who they are. You don't really get to know who they are as a person because you're so much more than what you do. And like I think you've done a great job at this as well, like sharing your story and your journey, and you touched on it, like the hair transplant and your weight loss journey. And like from the first time I had a conversation with you a few years ago, like you're completely transformed now. Like it's like a different person. And it's been cool to see the journey. So I think just like showing that you're a human and also sharing your learnings with people is huge. Like you give more than you ask with your personal brand. And then people will just naturally come to you and trust you enough to work with you or buy from you or whatever.
Man, I believe that. I didn't believe that a few years ago. But I'm just like, really? Is that easy if you're just out there? And it is. You go places, and if people see you on social media and they see you have a following, it doesn't matter who's following you. They're not looking into that. They're just like, oh, if other people trust this person, I should also trust them. And you just start any interaction with a leg up compared to, a competitor or somebody you're competing with on a job application or anything like that. So
Mhm.
I got yeah, it was Alex Hermosi. He was talking about personal branding, and he says your personal branding is you. It's not your business, which I completely agree with you. And that's why I didn't want to do it at the beginning as well. It's like, I don't even have that much things to talk about with business. But Alex Hermosi says, well, what makes me me? It's like gyms, franchising, entrepreneurship. Like that's my life. And that's what I post about. It's not just about selling anything. It's just like I just post about my life, and then people inquire about what I'm doing, um, rather than just posting about the business side. So
Yep.
what would be, I guess, what's the best way to get started with your personal brand?
I guess just like figure out your content pillars. Like I think people overthink it and it's like who are you and what is important to you? And maybe write your mission statement. It doesn't have to be your mission statement for your business, but like what are your goals with your personal brand? And just start putting out content and don't fall off, like stay consistent with it. Like if you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to post 5 times a week on LinkedIn, and then you burn through all your content in 2 weeks and then you go ghost for 2 months, like you can't do that. So I would like get real with yourself and be like, okay, I'm going to commit to posting one video a week and one photo and whatever static post a week on Instagram or on LinkedIn or whatever, and then stick to it and follow through on it. And then also make an effort to engage on those platforms, because people post and ghost too. They think, okay, I can just share my story and then they'll come, and it'll work that way. But you get what you put in. So you go, you engage on other people's posts, like it's often reciprocated. That's a huge piece of it, is the engagement.
Share a social media personal branding strategy that has been made up, and then you give me, I mean, made up by me, and this is what I'm doing. Um, but I do want to give a few practical things that people can follow after you give your feedback on what's good and what's not, because I don't know. Because if I just heard you correctly, it's consistency.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then having your pillars of what the content. So I did that, kind of analyze my life. It's fitness, family, work-life balance, entrepreneurship, mental health. Those are kind of the typical things. And then I came up with a schedule Monday through Friday, and it was at this time in the day, we're posting this. And then it's kind of alternating. Like Thursdays is always a fitness post, Thursday morning, where Thursday afternoon is always a LinkedIn poll. And both of the, or like the LinkedIn poll I just created with ChatGTP. Anyways, I have somebody that's managing and running all of that, and I hated doing the captions and the comments. So I just did a lot of back and forth with ChatGTP. I like when you say it like this, and I don't like it when you say it like that. Then once that was built out, then the person of the Philippines, it's like $5 or $6 an hour, they will comment on 30 people's posts per day, and like 50 people's posts per day per platform. And I do think it helps boost that. And then liking all of the comments on my own post and then responding to those. Anyways, there's just a brief, like, here's a handful of ideas that I'm doing. I'd love to hear your feedback, more geared towards the audience though. Like, if you're trying to follow the strategy, do this, don't do this. This is good, this is bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good that you found what works for you. And if you want to delegate stuff, you can for sure. I think for me, just based off of my experience, like ChatGPT is really good at giving you ideas for content and copywriting, but I don't think it's good at structuring posts specifically for LinkedIn. Like it doesn't know how to do like a good hook that's gonna stop people in their tracks and like want to read the rest of your post. So a lot of things I do manually, like I get it for, inspiration or whatever. And then I actually don't use, like, let's talk specifically about LinkedIn and Instagram as well. Like the scheduling tools on those platforms are finicky. And oftentimes when you use them, it affects your performance or your impressions on your post. So, like on LinkedIn, I used to schedule
Heard
all my
that too.
posts
Yeah.
every Sunday night. Like, why would they implement a feature and then punish you when you use it? Like, why? Like, what are you doing? Aren't you here to like help me out and use your platform? But they want you on there to post, right? Because if you're there posting, then you're on it and you're using it and you're scrolling and whatever. So, um, every Sunday night, like I write all my posts out for the week and then I manually go in and then post them. And I spend an hour each day just engaging in the comments or like messaging people back on the platform. And I found that to be like a very effective strategy. And again, like you can figure out what works for you. If you want to delegate a lot of that stuff, then I think that's great too. But I'm kind of a control freak when it comes to like engaging with people, especially because I spend most of my time on that platform. Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with you on that. I think any and every time you can and want to do it yourself, 1,000%. It's going to be way more authentic. Probably was doing it myself only for a handful of months, and then I'm like, oh
Mhm.
crap, it's either going to go to zero or I'm going to outsource it and get
Yeah.
80% effectiveness. But I 100% agree with that. Um, and kind of fast forwarding again, the touching on something that you said before, and your personal brand follows you. Unless you're just going to keep your same job for the rest of your life, like that personal brand is so important. When I had a business coach kind of taking me through this a few years ago, and I started, and I was like, no, I'm just going to post on Dirty Dough that we franchise. Like, if that's my goal, Dirty Dough already has over 100,000 followers. I don't have any. Like, and he goes, yeah, but how long are you going to stick with Dirty Dough for? I was like, I don't know, a few
Forever.
years at most because I have ADHD. And he's like, well, that's the point. He goes, I'm a coach, but before as a coach, I had this other business, and before that business, I had another business. But every time I sell a business, it doesn't matter because my following is supporting me as an individual, not as a business, and that value there, definitely see it there. Okay, jumping into closing up Brodo. What was the hardest part about that? I'm sure there's 1,000 things that are extremely hard about that, and then Anyways, we'll go with that, and then I'll ask the next question.
Yeah, yeah. It was, I guess, like one of the hardest pieces because I filed for bankruptcy, and that's very stigmatized and not spoken of highly by society. Like if you filed for bankruptcy, it's not something that you wear proudly on your chest. It's not a badge of honor. But I look at it differently now. Like I've reframed that definition. But I would say like the hardest part is just knowing when to quit. Because I was trying to push a boulder up a hill and then realizing that the boulder was cemented to the ground most of the time. And it's like it doesn't matter how hard I push or how many people I get to help me push this boulder up this hill, it's just not going to move. Like there were so many problems with the business that just it just wasn't working. And we have an ego, and it's hard sometimes to make a decision to give up on something, even when it's the right decision. So I think just like coming to terms with shutting it down when I wanted it to work so bad, and the mental aspect of it, of having a failure. Like it was my first business, it was my first crack at entrepreneurship, and I ended up in Mexico doing ayahuasca with 20 strangers. I was in therapy. I like went for a 12-hour long walk with no headphones and a journal one day. And I think I did like 60,000 steps. Like just to I'm like, I need to fix what's in my head and just process this because, I think we try to stay busy and distract ourselves a lot of times. And I didn't give myself um the ability to just feel what was happening. So
Did ayahuasca help with that? I'm a big proponent of psychedelics.
yeah.
Ayahuasca's on my list, but I'm scared of it. Overcome that fear. Um, but I'd love to hear why you decided ayahuasca and what were the pros and cons.
Yeah. So I guess they call her Grandma Aya. So it's like a
Mm.
feminine plant, right? And when you're called to her, you listen. So I went, and the retreat that I went to was a healing retreat. There was a bunch of things that we did. Like we did cold plunging, we did this like ceremonial sauna, there was yoga every day, meditation. And then there were two ayahuasca ceremonies, and you start at 10:30 at night and it goes till 7:30 in the morning. And they have a shaman come in and like play music and like host the ceremony. And it's a very sacred space. But for me, I think I just wanted to tap into my subconscious because I know there's a lot that's under there that I haven't really been able to see or work through. And when I did the plant medicine, it's like someone unlocked that door and then everything just came up. And it was like drinking from a fire hose, basically. Like it's a lot at once. And you're like, holy shit, how do I process all of this stuff? And it was probably the most difficult thing I've ever done. And I think there's a reason why you're afraid because you're not afraid of doing it. It's afraid of what's going to come up when you do it. Right. But
Well,
the way that I'll say though, the way that it's portrayed, like I was on Reddit threads before I did this and I made a mistake of reading people's stories. And the way that people describe it, it's not really like you don't see someone have snake come out of their eyes or like howling at the moon or whatever stories. Like it's everyone's in a circle, everyone has their eyes closed and they're just like rocking back and forth and they're in their own little worlds, and then everyone takes turns throwing up, which is like the unpleasant aspect of the ceremony. But
um, I want to thank you for the explanation. I
yeah.
have looked into it a lot. I think it was probably Joe Rogan that was
Okay.
preaching on it the last few years. I'm like, okay, I've had some very intense experiences on LSD, on
Mm.
mushrooms, and peyote. I've tried I've tried quite a
Yeah.
few. And they're always beautiful at the end and you can always reflect, but like during it, sometimes you're just like, oh my gosh, this is in my brain. How? Why? Where's this been hiding? Psilocybin specifically, which is the active ingredient in mushrooms,
Mhm.
it deactivates the outermost layer of your brain called the default mode network. And that is like when you say, Erica, who are you? And you give me all your response of everything you've done and where you've been, that's all the default mode network talking. Like that is the ego, that is the conscious. I mean, that's what we're typically aware of conscious um, in our conscious experience. If you put yourself under a brain scan, an MRI brain scan, while you're on psilocybin, you're thinking that your brain's firing a ton, right? Because you're like, I'm seeing all these cool colors and sounds, and well, but it's actually the opposite. It's deactivating that outermost layer of your brain. So what you're experiencing is your subconscious mind, and you're like, holy shit, that was in there. How long has that been in there for? I didn't know I felt that way about that subject or about myself or why am I always doing XYZ? And it really just opens your eyes to that subconscious mind. So
Mhm.
I 100% agree with you on that. And I like that you explored that as well. Because do you think you would have done all this like ice baths, 12-hour walks, ayahuasca, unless your business crushed you? I wouldn't have personally. I wouldn't have gone down that. I have an ice bath in my garage and a sauna and a red light therapy upstairs, a full body massage thing right here. And it's like, if my business didn't crush me to go find these answers, I wouldn't have had these answers. And I'm way better off now that I know how to regulate my nervous system and be more aware of my thoughts.
Yeah, I know 100%. Yeah, those did everything that happened with the business. It pushed me to look for, I guess, like healthier coping mechanisms. Because normally I would default to alcohol or drugs or whatever, like the old me would just, or food. Food was a big one, and television, or I would just numb everything and not take care of myself. But also, when you're going through really challenging things, if you're doing all of that stuff on top of it, that's not good for you. You just feel worse about yourself. So I guess I did take it to the extremes. Like I definitely wouldn't do a 12-hour walk. Like if I don't know if I would have done it if I wasn't in such like a crisis mode. I also did a hero dose of mushrooms too, which was a whole nother thing. Like I've never done anything like that, and yeah, it was crazy. But
How many grams is like 6 grams ish?
I
I don't
did.
know.
I think yeah, I did like. Okay, so this sounds like so sketchy, but my friend, my friend's friend, like grows mushrooms, and I was gonna do like a guided one with like a psychotherapist, but it was like $2,000. So I thought, okay, I'll go buy $50 of mushrooms from my friend who like grows it, and I know what it is, and
Yep.
I'll just do it in my apartment by myself, and I'll have my friend on speed dial. So like I did like the
The
eye
blindfold.
mask,
Yep.
and I had a playlist on, and I did, I think, like 5.3 grams, and I just blended it in like a smoothie and I drank
Uh,
it, and then yeah, and then it really, I didn't think it would hit me the way it did, but I've never had
yeah,
anything like that.
you go in another universe for a little bit.
I was somewhere else, man. Like especially with the eye mask. I remember getting up to go to the bathroom and I'm like, "Oh God, this is like this is crazy."
They say an ego death,
Yeah.
like you forgetting who you are and you forgetting that you're a human consciousness, right? That is very common with psilocybin, especially like on a hero's dose. And the science backs it up. It's because it's deactivating the part of your brain that's in charge of that holds your ego and holds like I am this person, I'm not this person. When in reality, consciousness is just a pure, awareness of everything, and that is all made up in the mind. Anyways,
Yeah.
last question or group of questions. I want to hit on the bankruptcy because that's something that I've been scared to death on. Luckily, I had a brother. He's 13 years older than me. He probably filed for bankruptcy close to 20 years ago. So when I started getting in deep shit with Dirty Dough, as far as like, holy crap, we're just $200,000 loss every single month, and I'm always raising money. Then I'm scared to death. Like, okay, well, what if I can't raise money in 3 more months, or 6 months, or next month, or whatever that timeline was? I was able to go and talk with somebody who's been through bankruptcy because the thought of bankruptcy was way scarier than actually understanding what bankruptcy was. And I'm talking to my therapist, and this was earlier just this year, talking with my therapist as well. And she's like, well, what do you get to keep and what do you not get to keep with bankruptcy? I was like, I don't know. I'm not going to look into that. That means it's real. She's like,
Yeah.
you're an idiot. So I look into it and getting clarity and actually going to the end, like, okay, what is bankruptcy like? And what do you get to keep your primary, you get to keep your house, you get to keep your cars within reason, and you get to keep your freaking retirement accounts, RAs, 401ks. I'm like, oh, I actually probably wouldn't miss a beat by going with bankruptcy, but it tormented me for a year because I just never looked into it. What was your experience as far as like expectations of what bankruptcy is, the process versus what it was after going through it?
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, right? And it's this big scary word that no one talks about. And I don't know the statistics in America because America is substantially bigger than Canada, but on average, I think like 330 people filed for bankruptcy every day last year in Canada.
Mm.
But how many of those people share it openly? Like no one does. No one talks about it. And for me, it was the same thing. It was going to people who have been through the process and just like understanding how it works and then how it's going to impact me long term. And I'm in a place right now in my life where I don't have a house, I don't have kids. My car I owned, but it was below a certain value. And so nothing was really at stake for me. It was kind of just a reset button. And that's what it is for a lot of people, is just a reset button. And it doesn't really impact a whole lot in your future either. Like I thought, oh my God, I'm like never going to be able to buy a house. I'm never going to be able
Yeah.
to have a credit card again. And that's not the case at all. It's just, yeah, it's just I'm in bankruptcy period until the end of the year. So you can't make above a certain amount of money because they want you broke and miserable to, it's like, here's your punishment for being bad. But yeah, it's gonna be over for me soon, and I filed in April. I think I filed on April Fools actually. So
Really?
yeah,
No, I think you did share that on your podcast, the April Fool's, but it wasn't a joke.
no, not joke.
I recently heard somebody talk about the beauty of bankruptcy and that bankruptcy, the option for bankruptcy drives the economy. Because if you didn't have bankruptcy as an option, you wouldn't push as hard. Like, or I should say, people wouldn't push as hard. Some people might anyway, but knowing that, like, okay, my family is never going to be like physically not safe for myself because of bankruptcy. So like I can go make riskier moves that will provide more jobs potentially in the economy they because we have a safety net, and that
Mhm.
safety net allows us to take more risks, and then everybody benefits from it. Yes, some people file for bankruptcy, but all the people that don't, we're still benefiting from the jobs that were created from everybody else. So I thank you for sharing that, and thank you also for taking away the scariness of it, because it's just an event that happens in life. And it's, again, I think it's a beautiful safety net that society provides, and I think we
Yeah,
need it. So
yeah, agreed.
Erica, I really appreciate you being on the show. Where can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, accepting Erica. My podcast is You're Not a Bad Person, and then I'm on LinkedIn, Erica Rankin. That's my name.
Awesome. And then the personal branding company, how do they get in
Yeah,
contact with
so I don't have a sign yet for it, but it's going to be called the Magnitude Method. So that is going to be launching this month or next month. We'll see how things go. But yeah, if you go to my website, ericarankin.com, there's a wait list on there if you want to sign up. So I'll plug that.
you? Awesome. We'll throw all those links in the show notes. Thanks, Erica.
Awesome.